to reach communities and lives to stay connected. That's according to Africa International Advisors, which recently published a thought provoking article titled The Roads We Never Build Rethinking Access to Infrastructure Finance in Africa. To unpack the key insights, we're joined by Joseph Kihara, who is Africa Practice Lead at Africa International Advisors. Joseph, a very good morning to you. Thanks for making time.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Asanda.
Why is there still a disconnect between available capital and infrastructure delivery on our continent of Africa?
Yeah, definitely, definitely. So I think a couple of issues. Number one being that if you think about risk and return, and how investors perceive risk, they are more likely to invest in your traditional asset classes, such as your bonds, such as your equities, as opposed to your infrastructure, right? That being said, there aren't any specific frameworks or current modalities that allow you as an individual investor to go and invest in, let's say, a municipality water project, right? So it doesn't, we don't have that specific asset access, as opposed to if you want to invest in real estate, you can definitely go and invest a small amount, let's say in a REIT. So then if you think about that, and if you think about how we look at infrastructure in Africa, a lot of these frameworks have been imported from our other continental regions because that's where the capital lies. And adopting these frameworks in Africa doesn't necessarily apply because we are literally in a different structural environment.
So, what structural changes then that will need to be implemented in terms of making financing more accessible and appropriate for local projects?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. That's a good question. So I think the biggest thing that needs to happen is you need to have consolidation of where you can access these projects. So a consolidated pipeline means that project sponsors can go to one shop and have an end-to-end delivery of the specific projects. Not to mention that there has been a disconnect in terms of accountability for actually implementing these specific projects. So what that means is for you to create that confidence in the market, you need to create that accountability in terms of value for money, creating value for the investors when you implement and deliver these projects. On top of the fact that there hasn't been mechanisms in place where we have leveraged citizens or people in the diaspora to deliver on the specific infrastructure projects. So from a policy perspective, there potentially needs to be some shifts that actually push in terms of bringing more awareness into the localized community, but also in the diaspora market as
So, for long term investments, how can African governments improve their preparedness when it comes to projects and them attracting these
well.
long term investments?
Yes, yes. So I think the biggest challenge that African governments have is two things. Number one, speaking about risk, and they're perceived to be risky. And what that means is capital will flow to them at a higher rate, not at a higher rate, but at a higher cost of capital because they perceive them to be risky. So if you think about that, and if you think about how they can solve for that, what they can do is for you to be able to improve your delivery of those specific projects, you need to improve the technical capacity to be able to execute on that. So what that means is if you want a project that is in the water sector, you need to hire the right people in terms of project managers, in terms of people who are technically capable and have the right capacity to ensure that that's executed. That being said, before you even get to that point, you need to have the right project that has been prepared in the right form. So basically, it has gone through project preparation and it's in the right form and state to be able to be financed and executed. And the last bit is because sovereigns and governments and national governments are constrained, you need to have that integration or that standardization between private and public frameworks. Because most of the time, if you're thinking about the triple P and how to execute on triple P, that there's potentially that misalignment between public and private sector processes and if you standardize that, then that makes the whole process more seamless.
What portion would you say of trying to secure investment should be focused more on a regional level, and what portion should be on an international level?
Yeah, so if you think about that, so my depends on what kind of infrastructure we're looking at. So most of the strategic infrastructure, most of which should be funded locally, and that's why you have UTPP. And in some instances, you have seen in some jurisdictions they have managed to finance those kind of infrastructure locally. But because again, fiscus are very constrained, there needs to be that element of international regional integration and financing, to bridge that gap.
What role should development finance institutions play in bridging the access gap, and do they have that much capacity?
Yeah, so look, the capital's there. If you think about DFIs, their role should be to blend. So what means is, if you think about what the government does, it looks at strategic infrastructure models in the energy space, in the water, in the ICT sector, and the role of DFIs and multilateral institutions would be to be able to fund, let's say, project preparation, right? So that reduces the risk in terms of execution of that project, but also in terms of preparing that project to the right state. But also, they can be able to leverage localized financing to finance those projects, in tandem with the government, right? To ensure that they are executed upon as well.
So, which sectors show the most promise for a transformational infrastructure investment in Africa today? You touched on energy and water when it comes to development finance institutions.
Yeah. So I think the biggest sector is probably, and I would just mention one. I think energy is the most prominent, not necessarily just as a sector, but also as an enabler. So without cheap energy, it's very hard for you to industrialize. Energy that is affordable, that is accessible, enables you to have other developmental and transformative positive impacts across all those other sectors. Not to mention that, access to clean water is also important, but energy does, become a very strong enabler to ensure that, you can create jobs, you can industrialize, you can power these other sectors that you're talking about. Because if you think about what is happening during load shedding, we used to have water problems because, some of the pumps, were not working. So yeah, so for me, it's energy. So once we create energy, then we can, keep stepping up, across all these other sectors.
Joseph, thank you again for your time. We'll leave it there for today. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Asanda, for having me, and it was a pleasure.
Great. Joseph Kihara is Africa Practice Lead at Africa International Advisors, talking about infrastructure and our continent, how far we've come and how far we still need to go.